Hi, everyone. I'm Devin. As mentioned, I lead the security and privacy engineering team at Pinterest. I've worked there for about a decade and helped form the security organization. And for the past couple of years, I've been working on privacy engineering. And today, I'm going to talk to you about how we're using content security policy to better our privacy posture. So a little bit of background context into why we care about content security policy. Modern websites like Pinterest use third parties client-side for a bunch of different purposes. At Pinterest, we use it for identity providers, for sign up and login. We use it for bot detection. We use it for measuring some of our analytics and for measuring performance of ads we run on other websites. And all of these third parties are being trusted to handle our users' data because any client-side integration is going to send personal data to these third parties. What kind of user data are we talking about? Any kind of third-party integration client-side is going to get, obviously, the data sent by your application, but it's also going to get third-party cookies. It's going to get things like IP, user agent, and they'll also have the ability to perform fingerprinting on the connection. So even if you remove third-party cookies from the equation, we still do care about these third-party connections and the type of data they're processing because it is personal data. So that brings content security policy. It's an HTTP header, and it tells the browser what third parties you allow to host content on your website. It's essentially a collection of these things called directives, which specify specific types of content. So script source is referring to JavaScript, image source is referring to images. And it's most commonly used to prevent a security risk called cross-site scripting. But I'm not going to talk about that today. In this policy, for example, we have an image source here, and it specifies self and i.pinimage.com. That's one of our CDNs that we host. And so this is saying that we allow images to be loaded from i.pinimage.com, but we're not going to allow them from thirdparty.com. And what's going to happen is the browser is going to block any sort of request from happening that is to a domain that's not on this list. And so there will be no user data sent to that domain. So what are the benefits of having a CSP? We also have a schema of our third parties that we are using in a centralized place. And this allows us to keep track of all of the third parties that we're using client-side. And this is really, really powerful in terms of responding to requests for information from internal teams or from external parties. And it's also really important for making sure you're meeting compliance requirements for all the new requirements that are coming into play. Because you can't check all your third parties if you don't know who all your third parties are. This is way more powerful than scanning-based approaches because you're going to get complete coverage of your website. If something isn't on this list, it's getting blocked. There's no user data going to it. And so a scanning-based approach is going to have the downside of you have to trigger every piece of functionality and every piece of conditional logic that you or your third parties might have based off of locale or other types of information on the request. We also use it as a gating function for onboarding new third parties. So we have this schema in a centralized place in our code repo. Where security team's watching it, the privacy legal team gets clued in whenever a new third party is being involved, and we can make sure that they're meeting all of the requirements around onboarding and that they're meeting our requirements internally as well. And lastly, what was already spoiled a little bit, one of the more powerful benefits we've seen with CSP is sending different policies based on the user requesting a page. So if a user, we send different policies based off of the user's type, so unauthenticated versus authenticated, advertiser versus non-advertiser, because different third parties are used for different purposes. So in this case, we have a user who opts out of analytics, and we don't include that exampleanalytics.com domain. And then we have a user who opts in, and we do include that domain. And what this protects against is that if we ever have a bug in those if statements that are sprinkled throughout our code base, where we're not including that example, or we are including the example analytics page and the user who opts out, they won't get their data sent to that domain. And so this protects us against ever violating the user's consent accidentally due to the complexity of our code base and our service. So what can you do to deploy a CSP on your website? So if you're starting from scratch, you don't have any policy, I would recommend coming up with an initial policy. You might know some of the third parties are used, but I would recommend clicking around, opening up the developer tools of your browser you're using and seeing where you're making connections to. There's some browser extensions out there that will do this for you automatically, and so you just click around on the web and it will come up with an initial policy. What's really important for this initial policy is don't put wildcards in it because those allow connections to all domains, and have a default source. If you don't have a default source, if you're missing any of the directives that are out there, it doesn't have anything to fall back to, and it defaults to wildcard. Once you have that initial policy, you should put it into report-only mode. Content security policy does block content on your website, and so if you block something that you need for your website to function, that will break your website, and that's a big deal. So putting it into report-only mode, what it will do is it will enable you to get a report in a JSON format to whatever URI you put into the report URI field. And so this will tell you what's going to break if you actually put this into enforce mode. Once you've gone through these reports and you're pretty confident that the only reports coming in are due to malware on your users' devices and browser extensions that are injecting content, which you will get false positives like that, you should put it into enforce mode. And a nice thing about your report URI is you can actually add query parameters at the end of it to sort of differentiate that this is my policy for reporting versus this is the one for enforcing. So you can roll this out gradually, a random number between 1 and 100, and roll it out to 1% of users or things like that. So if you're already using a content security policy on your website and you're using it for security purposes, you're probably using nonces or hashes in your script source. This is the recommendation for modern users because it's better at protecting against cross-site scripting. The trouble is, if you're using nonces or hashes in a content security policy, you can't use an allow list in the same policy. It overrides it. It basically checks if the nonce is present, then this is a good piece of JavaScript. So how do you get around this? You can actually send multiple content security policies, and this is a really powerful tool. If you have users on older versions of Safari, you'll need to disable this for those users, but every modern browser has supported this for some time besides those Safari users. And so you just comma separate those in the header, and you can send multiple policies at the same time. Other things to watch out for, there are specific types of third-party assets that you can embed on your page that are high risk. JavaScript specifically is very risky because JavaScript grants the third party access to act as you. It violates the integrity of your website, or it can violate the integrity of your website. It can violate the availability of your website. It can take your website down. And it also gives that third party ability to pull data from the page that you might not expect them to and set things like first party cookies. So JavaScript is very dangerous. You'll want to review those integrations very carefully. Iframes are also dangerous from a privacy standpoint because iframes are essentially windows to another website inside of your website, and your content security policy does not apply to them. So they can include other third parties beyond the third parties that you have allowed. They also can do things like fingerprinting via JavaScript. So some of the limitations, I already mentioned the iframes being a thing you need to manually review. Some third parties that we use, one example is we have an identity provider that is also using the same domain for marketing purposes. And so we have to do some checks to make sure that we're not including their marketing pixel, which is on the same domain as their identity providing. And so you'll have to identify those based off of the third parties you use. Most of the third parties we use are not in this category, and most of them use a single domain per purpose, or we're only using them for one purpose. So thanks everyone for listening to my talk. We think CSP for privacy purposes is really useful, and we believe it's critical to keep track of all the third parties we're using client side and make sure they're meeting our requirements. We also think it's a really great tool for ensuring that they are only sending data to these third parties in ways that are consistent with our consent options and policies. Thanks everyone.